Hello, I'm Dr. Pierre Samaan, and it's great being back with you as we continue in our series on Unmasking Narcissism. I hope you're enjoying it. We've been talking about the different personas or personalities as the subtypes of narcissistic personality disorder, and I'm finding everywhere I go, I'm seeing more of them around as I'm researching more and more, and I'm looking and discussing with people, and I'm saying, oh my gosh, it's almost like they're around every corner. So it's good to get to know a little more about it, to understand it a little bit more. It doesn't mean we have to be afraid of them. It doesn't mean we have to avoid them, although in some cases it might be a wisdom to avoid. It just means if we can understand, we can relate a little bit better, we can get along a little better, and sometimes we can benefit from a narcissist as well, as we spoke about last time when we were talking about the communal narcissism. Well, as we discuss this, unmasking cerebral narcissism is our topic today. The false self of cerebral narcissism would be that intellect, that person that inflates themselves up to the point of they're smarter than you. In fact, they're smarter than anybody else. And don't try to tell them otherwise. Otherwise, they're going to come up with this long portrayal of who they are and where they've come from and how much schooling they've had and all this and that. We'll get into those details. I'll tell you a little story about one. First, let's talk about the book Unmasking Addiction that I have written. It's you can get it from Amazon. You can get it from WestBow Press and other sources, focusing on personal empowerment in the addiction field and growing and learning. The current cultural emphasis on personal empowerment and self-improvement resonates with the book's themes of understanding, overcoming, and transforming one's life. It encourages readers to take proactive steps towards their recovery. Unmaskingaddiction.org. If you'd like to read a little more about it, please go online and do so. Well, the seventh persona of narcissism is our discussion today. Now, the subtypes of narcissistic personality disorder are common. They're well known. I'm adding an eighth a little later on as we get further into this series, and there'll be an eighth persona that came up as I was researching all this, and I thought, they're not talking about this one. And so we'll be discussing that a little later on. For now, the seventh persona of narcissism, the cerebral narcissist, represents the intellectualized false self. Remember, we've been discussing that mask in front and the false self that is portrayed by the mask. Well, the cerebral narcissist, that false self, is their intellect. It's like the mask looks like a brain, and their identity is built on their cognitive superiority. So in other words, they are smart. In fact, most of them may be geniuses. Well, maybe I've gone a little too far with that. Let's just say they're smart. I think geniuses have a little more intellect, perhaps a little more personality, a little more ability to understand that that's wrong, to inflate that. The genius, I think, is a little better at grasping and empathy, you might say, because they can think through those things a little more. And I'm sure some can't, but the one who's just, they've built themselves up for validation through intellect, they can't have relationship. It's hard to have relationship, and that's typical among all narcissisms. Knowledge replaces connection. Intellect replaces empathy. Wow, that's a lonely life, wouldn't you say? I'd probably say that. This persona or personality appears enlightened, yet relationally starved. Their over-reliance on intellect isolates rather than connects. For those of you who are well endowed intellectually. It's not me. I consider myself about average. For those of you that are way above, my wife, Linda, we were married 50 years. She was a genius IQ, 165 was her IQ, and she was just as sweet as could be. So having a genius IQ doesn't mean you're a cerebral narcissist. Let's keep that straight so we don't think otherwise. The intellect serves the person, serves the ego. So you might ask yourself, if you're intellectual, if you perhaps you're a genius, perhaps you're a professor or a teacher of some sort, is my intellect serving my relationships or defending my ego? Because that's a good indicator of a cerebral narcissist. If you happen to notice that they're constantly defending their ego, inflating that intellect about themselves, so you see that, then chances are they're not serving relationships. It's not for the sake of others. It's not for benefiting others. It's not for caring for others. It's all about self-involvement. And we'll be talking about that a little more, but a good example of that was when I was in college, a long time ago, my clinical psychology class, the professor, who happened to be very, very smart, no doubt about that, but he was a cerebral narcissist, and he was just full of himself. And one of the first day of class, we're all sitting in the class, and it was a big class. And he says, well, don't expect to get an A in this class if you're not a genius, because I'm a genius, and I expect geniuses to have the A's, and if you don't have the A's, don't expect one. And I went, oops, maybe I should change classes. And I looked around, everybody was going, whoa, everybody was worried there. But that's cerebral narcissism, inflating themselves up, and not for the sake of teaching and encouraging to elevate yourself to get an A, but to discourage everyone who isn't as intellectual as he was. That's what they do. And they'll discount any number of things that doesn't appeal to their intellect. And we'll be talking about all that. Well, the false self is explained in a defense mechanism, and that is that the false self is a defense mechanism protecting valuable core, or I should say the vulnerable core of the person. What's behind the mask is the vulnerable core. You might say the child inside, and they're protecting that. So the puppeteer, or the child that's protecting themselves with this mask of intellect, it's a defense mechanism that's constantly in use to protect themselves, and to protect themselves through what they're really good at, and that's their intellect. Cerebral narcissists use intellect as armor. That's their way to protect. Knowledge masks people, self-righteously arrogant, but love builds up, according to the Bible. Love builds up. It doesn't tear down. The example of that professor, he was tearing down. He wasn't building up, but he was building himself up in what he was saying. With cerebral narcissism, the intellect becomes a mask against shame. Paul's warning, knowledge alone puffs up, but love builds. So you might want to ask yourself, am I using my mind to love or to control? Cerebral narcissists are going to use their mind, as that professor did, to control, not to build up. And there's some core traits to cerebral narcissism. Intellectual superiority complex, of course, is the obvious core trait. If we look at the picture this guy subtly reminding others of his advanced degree whenever a disagreement arises, convinced no one else's opinion could possibly be as informed as his own. Well, another trait might be conversational domination. Picture him during every discussion. He redirects the topics back to his theories, back to himself, interrupting others before they can finish a single thought. I was thinking of this the other day, and I was watching the news, and I saw the video of one of the journalists, one of the TV news people interviewing somebody, and he kept interrupting the person who was trying to give an answer, bringing it back to what he wanted the person to say, and it was bringing it back to him. And I was thinking right away, intellectuals and cerebral narcissism, bringing it back to his inflated sense of self, what he thought was important, of what he thought should be said or heard, not what the other person really had to say. And he kept interrupting, and eventually it was cut off. I thought, yeah, look at that. Wow. You don't think of these things when you see them on an everyday basis until you start studying and you start realizing, wow, look at all that. So how can you be a good journalist if you're going to do something like that? Well, another one is validation through knowledge, another trait of the cerebral narcissist. And picture this guy, he feels most alive only when others praise his insight, equating admiration for his intellect with proof of his personal worth. And that's not just once in a while, it's all the time. Relational deficits is also another trait of cerebral narcissism. Picture him struggling to form genuine emotional connections. Look at the people around him, looking away, looking down. They're not connecting with him. And in order to connect, they would have to feel equal. They're not allowed to feel equal. And if you threaten a cerebral narcissist, as you would any type of narcissist, they're going to punish you for it. So what do? Well, you look away, you look down, you don't put yourself on an equal level, or you just stay in agreement, and that's safe. But is it constructive? No, of course not. And so what do relationships do? I don't think I want to go out with that person. I don't think I want to go to dinner with them. Or, oh, do we have to go to his house? Or do we have to take his class? It pushes relationships away. So relationships are viewed as a platform for showcasing intelligence rather than opportunities for mutual understanding or empathy, which is understanding in itself. Cerebral narcissists often dismiss emotional or spiritual truths. So let's try to encourage empathy over performance, because they have a lot of trouble with that. In a clinical overview in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, cerebral narcissists meet the core criteria for the narcissistic personality disorder in that they can be arrogant, the grandiose, constant need for admiration, a lack of empathy, which is in all narcissism, and yet unlike many of the narcissists where they're more somatic type, body type, appearance type, their counterparts who seek validation through appearance or sexuality, cerebral narcissists seek it through intellect, mastery of ideas, and perceived superiority of mind. So who are they going to hang out with? They're going to hang out with other cerebral narcissists, and they're going to constantly be at odds in competing. And in the competing, the defense mechanisms kick in, which can cause troubles for them later, as lying or building up, inflating, and doing things on the sly, perhaps, because they deserve it. And if they deserve it, then you deserve to be taken advantage of because you're not as intellectual. And before you know it, they get themselves into trouble later on. Their intelligence becomes the acceptable facade or fake front for their disorder. Society often rewards brilliance, eloquence, and achievement, qualities that appear virtuous on the surface. But beneath this intellectual veneer lies that fragile self-esteem. Behind the mask is the child. And the child is in defense mode. The child is protecting itself. Speaking to a cerebral narcissist or any narcissist, if you want to have any type of conversation with them, if you want to get any type of genuine relationship, you have to look behind the mask. You have to try to connect with what's back there, and that's the child. And very often, emotionally, they're children. They're 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, perhaps a little older. How do you relate to them? How do you speak to them? You have to gain the trust of that child in order for them to, you might say, put down the mask temporarily, and it's usually just temporarily, just moments where you can have discussion with them. Well, what's the root of the false self? Beneath pride lies fear, the fear of inadequacy. The false self shields insecurity but isolates the person. You might ask yourself, what does your mind defend that your heart needs? What do all of us, when we have a need, how do we defend ourselves to keep that need or to attain that need? If we have to defend to attain it, how do we do that? Well, the cerebral narcissist, their defense mechanisms are such that denial is very strong. Rationalization, talking, going off into this other world, into a tangent of communication off the subject. Well, it was a simple yes or no question. And all of a sudden they're elaborating to the point of distraction because they don't want to answer the question. It's a threat if they answer the question. And so you get all these statements and everything else, that rationalization or intellectualization, telling you how smart or how much they know or whatever else about this subject or whatever, yet they haven't said yes or no to the question. The fear of exposure drives control, utilizing a myriad of defense mechanisms. So in other words, there's a lot of defense mechanisms in narcissism. The biblical truth, perfect love casts out fear. 1 John 4:18. With safe people and in secure environments, vulnerability is healing, not weakness. And there's a biblical warning on pride, because with all narcissism, pride is up there. It's a strong character. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, the Bible tells us. But with humility comes wisdom. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is, first of all, pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. You find that in James chapter 3. Wow. Well, all those things, you don't see that in narcissistic personalities. You don't see that in the cerebral narcissist. The Bible consistently contrasts pride with wisdom. One example is when we look at the Bible, we see King Saul. Remember King Saul in the Old Testament, before King David, the first king for the Hebrews. King Saul's pride cost him God's favor. The Bible encourages us to see humility as strength, not submission. The narcissist would see it as submission, surrender, lack of control, vulnerability. the threat response kicks in, they have to fight. And they're not going to flee, they're going to fight in most cases. And then there's another case study in the Bible, Ph.D.Published, the cerebral narcissist that was David's counselor, King David's counselor. Ph.D.Published brilliance brought status, but also ruin. His suicide after rejection reveals a fragile false self, symbolic of total control, a tragic illusion of mastery in the face of failure. Ph.D.Published in Hebrew means my brother is folly. Where do they come up with these names? Yeah? My brother is folly, so my brother is a fool. Ph.D.Published was a fool according to his name. Now, maybe that's why he became an intellect, I don't know. But gosh, he was very smart, and that's why he was King David's counselor. Trusted, and made good decisions in his advising. His intellect defined his worth. His advice was so esteemed that it was regarded as if one had inquired at the oracle of God, according to 2 Samuel chapter 16, verse 33. It was as if God was in him. God was telling him, giving him the information that he was passing along. However, when Absalom rebelled against his father, King David, Ph.D.Published joined the conspiracy. He betrayed King David. And this decision marked a tragic shift from divine loyalty to human ambition, which again, typical of the cerebral narcissist, it's about them. It's about their ego. It's about what they can get out of all that. And that's narcissism, isn't it? The inflated sense of self and what's in it for me? How can I maintain control? How can I take control over you, over others, take your friends, take others? That's what they do after a while. This decision marked a tragic shift from divine loyalty to human ambition. When his counsel to pursue King David immediately was rejected in favor of someone else, so Absalom favored someone else's advice during that rebellion, and that really upset the fragile state, the inner state of Ph.D.Published, because his identity was his intellect and his counsel and his being seen as the one special person that was heard, that was listened to. He recognized that Absalom's rebellion would fail. And he couldn't handle that because all he had was the intellect. All he had was his identity. Rather than repent, Ph.D.Published turned inward. His rejection and wounded pride turned to despair. His identity had become fused with his intellect and reputation, which is why you see in our country and in the universities, these professors who are going off on these unsupported directions, and they can't change their minds. Because if they change their minds, it's a reflection back on they were wrong. They can't let that happen. And so they're going to go in that direction. In fact, that direction gets stronger, bigger, broader. I don't know what we can do about it, but they're going to have to do something about it because that's false teaching. It's like changing history for the purpose of ego. So Ph.D.Published turned inward. He got depressed. His identity had become fused with his intellect and reputation. When that identity collapsed, so did his will to live. Intellectual identity without emotional grounding breeds despair. His suicide was a narcissistic type suicide, thought out, planned, determined, He was intellectualizing his own suicide. There's a contrast when we look at King David. Some might say the humble seeker. Even though David wasn't perfect, when he made a mistake, he was sorry. He repented. And unfortunately, the consequences of the mistake affected him for the rest of his life. But God forgave him. David sought God's counsel in all decisions. Humility anchored his wisdom. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God, he said. In James chapter 1, verse 5, it's telling us God listens. And if we ask God, he cares. He's not going to rebuke you when you're asking him for help, even if you did something wrong. He's going to help you. He knows the consequences of whatever you did is going to follow suit, because when you do something, there's going to be a consequence to it, or a reward, or a consequence of one or the other. It's the way life is. It's the way God created things to be. He doesn't have to throw the lightning bolt down at us when we do something wrong. It's just perpetuated in a way of a cycling. You do wrong, there's a consequence. You do right, there's benefit. There's something good comes out of it, in most cases, of course. Always exceptions. It becomes easy to see the differences between David's humility and Ahithophel's pride. David's relational connection with God, that's true wisdom. If you need wisdom, ask God. And seek counseling to learn humility, to learn empathy, to secure attachment, and to gain a little emotional stability as well. There's some psychological parallels to all this, and there's an effect called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Without humility and awareness, the ignorant remain confident while the wise remain cautious, is the Dunning-Kruger effect. Humility fosters growth, in other words. Overconfidence leads to error. Humility leads to learning. Over the years, I've seen in clients how true confidence grows from teachability. Basically saying you can almost see someone that you know is going to get better the first time you meet them because you can tell they're teachable. If we're teachable, we're going to learn. And if we're going to learn, we're going to grow. We're going to get better. If we're not teachable, our hearts are hard, or our pride is too strong, we're entitled in those ways of narcissism, there's no teachable spirit there. How are they going to grow? How are they going to learn? How are they going to get better? If it's all about benefiting themselves, they'll learn how to do that, but they're not going to grow. It's all encased within themselves. Eventually, they hit a wall. There's always a wall. Those that grow know how to get around the wall, or to get under it, or to get over it. They know how to get through it. But those who don't learn, they hit the wall. And they hit the wall. And they hit the wall. And like Ahithophel, they develop despair, discouragement, depression, and perhaps they do something because they can't stand it anymore. The paradox of the unteachable client, it's a paradox. People often come to counseling not because they're ready to change, but because life's pain has exceeded their ability to cope. And again, it's not everyone, but oftentimes that's why someone will come to counseling. In other words, crisis, not curiosity, brings them through the door. And with narcissistic personality, they have reasons for coming into counseling. So the cerebral narcissist or any of the narcissists, yeah, they'll come. It's usually, though, for other reasons. They'll come into counseling to appease someone else. They'll come into counseling to prove they're right rather than learn or grow. They'll attend counseling to gain control, either control over their partner, their family, their coworker, their friend, or the counselor even, because they'll try to control the dynamic of the counseling at the time. They'll discharge guilt by coming to counseling. Yes, some of them do feel guilt. Remember, we've spoken of mild to severe. If they crossed over that moderate zone, guilt and remorse is gone. Mild to moderate, they still have some guilt. They still have some remorse. They still have a conscience. It may be weak, but it's there. Crossing over now sociopathy, antisocial behavior, criminal behavior, or whatever else might be in there. No conscience, no remorse. So they don't have to discharge guilt. But those that are mild to moderate, yeah. Test whether someone truly understands. They'll do that. They'll come to counseling just to test, to see, do you really understand? Or does the wife or husband really understand? Or does the coworker or friend or family? It's testing, but it's all about them. These clients are not teachable yet. Now, that's an important word, yet, Y-E-T. Mild to moderate again. There's some teachability there. Crossing over, no. And you just kind of know, okay, it's just not going to happen with this group over here. And we get over to the far side where the Jezebel spirit is in the Bible, the more extreme. But they're reachable when they are mild to moderate. And if they're reachable, then okay, let's help them. Let's give them what they can receive. Let's teach them what they'll allow you to teach them. Whether you're a friend, family member, or counselor, doesn't matter. You're getting through their resistance. Narcissistic defense is very strong, easily seen. The defenses are found in the narcissist's pride, and based on their personality, inhibits that teachability because it threatens their identity. Never threaten the identity of a narcissist or a cerebral narcissist by saying you're wrong. Watch out. So you have to more plant seeds. You have to subtly approach things and almost make them think as though it's their idea. The false self depends on being right, superior, or unflawed. Accepting guidance feels like annihilation, not humility, to the cerebral narcissist or any narcissist. There's a theological depth to all this, and it comes down to knowledge versus love. We all possess knowledge, the Bible tells us, but knowledge puffs up while love builds up, according to Paul in 1 Corinthians. It can be very accurate to say that knowledge puffs up, and when it does, that puffing up, that inflation of self, is going to create problems. It's going to build up self, but in building up self, everything else gets torn down. So you can imagine how much better it would be to have both knowledge and love, rather than just knowledge. Love is very important as well. But love is also learning, and in learning, how can I love more? How can I do more? How can I help more? There needs to be knowledge there as well. And when there's both, that's far better than just knowledge alone. Love and knowledge aren't enemies. Paul's correction to the Corinthians reveals that intellectual pride fractures community. So ask yourself, does your knowledge build others or elevate you? Are you a giver with your knowledge, or are you just soaking in what you can get to inflate yourself, your ego, which inflates pride? And pride causes a fall, according to the Bible. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit or arrogant spirit before a fall. Pride often disguises itself as confidence, yet true confidence depends on God's strength, not personal glory. When pride rules the heart, it distorts perception. You stop listening. You can't hear others. You can't understand others. And are you still teachable when that occurs? You stop learning. The narcissist trusts their own judgment above all else. And that's when the fall begins. The example given of David's counselor and Ahithophel parallels Lucifer's fall. Pride isolates even the wise. We can see connections in clinical outcomes in areas such as burnout, despair, relational collapse. This is caution, not condemnation. If we see these things, I'm not condemning you. God doesn't condemn you. He's cautioning you. He's saying, if you see these things, do something about it. Don't keep repeating, because they'll just keep repeating. Change. And you have to identify, well, what needs changing? What is the path to healing? Off the mask, right? That's got to come off. That mask, that false self has got to come off, one way or another. So some steps in helping that mask to come off is it's not easy, it's work. Humility is really the first one. How are you going to gain humility? Well, it takes time. It takes work. Develop empathy, understanding. We're going to talk about that a little more in a moment. Well, that takes work too. Can't do it alone. Get counseling. Get help. Find a significant person you trust. Work with that person. To develop these things, you have to rewire the brain. And to rewire the brain, which can be done, it's plasticity, it can be done, takes a little time. With habit, compulsion occurs. With compulsion, change becomes more automatic. Balance knowledge with love. Seek professional help, because it's just, sometimes you just got to have that professional person who isn't going to get so easily offended by your reactions. And embrace biblical perspective. What does the Bible say? Do nothing from selfishness, the Bible says, or empty conceit, through factional motives or strife, but with an attitude of humility, being neither arrogant nor self-righteous. Regard others as more important than yourselves. Philippians chapter 2, verse 3. Well, it doesn't sound anything like the cerebral narcissist or any narcissism. Yet, if we see the Bible's telling us this and it's working for others, then I want it too. Yeah, I want it to work for me. For cerebral narcissist, transformation can come through humility, love, and counseling. A rescue plan can involve practical counseling, reflective journaling, prayer, and accountability. Accountability is very important. Can't do it by yourself. So there's practical exercises in cultivating empathy. As I mentioned earlier, that's one of the steps. You can nurture empathy through daily disciplines of awareness and service. And some of those disciplines might be the pause practice. That is, before responding to someone, pause and silently ask, what pain or hope might this person be carrying? What's behind what they're saying? In other words, what's behind the mask? Not what they say, but what's the reason for them saying it. A narcissist can't do that. They're just seeing what's being said and taking it as a threat to protect self, so the defenses kick in immediately. Scriptural reflection helps. Meditate on the passages showing Jesus' compassion, such as in John 11:35, where just 2 words, Jesus wept. Journaling helps. After interactions, write what you sensed about what just happened or about that other person. The emotions, not just your reactions. That helps you to gain empathy. It helps you to develop empathy when you're thinking more about the other person than yourself. And there's a term called listening fast. It basically means spend 1 day each week focusing on listening without correcting, comparing, or advising. That's a hard one. Especially if you're a narcissist, that's a hard one. How are you going to just listen? Okay, yeah, I hear you. I understand. Yeah. Without telling them they're wrong, without criticizing, without condemning. And then there's acts of presence. Visit or call someone who's lonely. Go over to the neighbor's house. Offer them some help. Bring a cake over to them, or donuts, or whatever they might like. If they're lonely, seek them out and be a friend. Not to fix them, but to be with them. Presence transforms isolation into connection. Helps develop empathy. So those are just a few things you can do to help develop empathy and humility if you're in that mild to moderate zone and you want to get a little better at being more human like the rest of us. And hopefully we're in that human category. From pride to purpose, transformation begins when intellect submits to divine wisdom. In Romans chapter 12, verse 2, in the New Living Translation, I like it, what it says in this verse. We often hear this verse quoted, renew the mind, and you hear it over and over again. But New Living Translation has a little more depth in the original translation, and it says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think, renewing the mind. Then you'll learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Renewing the mind. It's plasticity, it's neuroplasticity is renewing the mind. Neuroplasticity is the brain's remarkable ability to change its structure. And they didn't know this years ago. And with new technology and all that, they've discovered this, that you can change the wiring in the brain. It is possible. If we work at it, it can happen. That structure, that function, it gives us new responses to experiences, gives us new thoughts, which results in new behaviors. It's the biological foundation for emotional healing, habit formation, learning, and spiritual transformation. Every choice, thought, and emotional response either strengthens or weakens neural connections. Repeated patterns, so habits, doing it over and over again, saying it over and over again, practicing it over and over again, whether of fear, resentment, or gratitude, literally sculpts the brain. It's like architecture in the brain. You're changing it, you're transforming it, you're making it better. This means your brain is not static, it's living, renewing system designed by God to be transformed. He made the brain to transform, to renew, to be better, to learn. Integrating Bible scripture with emotional regulation creates balance. Surrender is not losing power, it's gaining clarity and peace. The word renewing implies an ongoing dynamic process. It's not just a one-time thing and it stays that way. It's neuroplasticity is what it's describing. How did they know that way back when? Thoughts become networks. Networks become habits, and habits form character. Can you learn empathy? Of course you can. You have to work at it, though. You have to recognize there's a problem with that and do something about it. Insecurity will occur with cerebral narcissists. As smart as they are, they'll be insecure. Healing begins when the intellect bows to humility. God never exposes to shame, but to heal. If you get caught in an untruth as a cerebral narcissist, you feel shame. And then you have to defend it to protect it, and you build bigger lies around it. They feel shame. They can't handle that, so they have to protect themselves all the more. What God reveals is intended to redeem you, to change for the better, to help you, not to condemn you. Change is possible when you stop defending the old self and start practicing the new one. Defenses protect the ego but block intimacy. Proper safety comes from vulnerability with God and those special people around you, those people that are close. In James chapter 4, verse 6, we read, "But he gives us more grace." That's why Scripture says, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. I want to be on God's side. So let's try to be a little more humble. True transformation comes not through brilliance, but through brokenness, redeemed by love. Well, a closing thought in all this. The leap from knowledge to love is not a surrender of intelligence. It's sanctification, being freed. Let the intellect serve humility. Let love illuminate wisdom. So I encourage you, embrace that balance of truth with tenderness, intellect with love. And thanks for following today. Give us a like if you got something out of this, and if you didn't, you don't have to like. But if you were listening, I'm sure if you ask God, you'll get something. There'll be a seed that's planted that you'll be able to use tomorrow, the next week, the next month, the next year. God always plants those seeds in us, and if we're listening and willing, they start sprouting later on. Next time in Unmasking Addiction, we're going to get into unmasking the narcissistic parent, that toxic parent. And that's going to be interesting. So the mask of virtue, unmasking the narcissistic parent in the home. It's going to be a 1- and 2-parter. We're going to talk about in the home first, and then we're going to talk about the children that are victimized by the narcissistic parent. So I hope you'll get something out of that. I'm sure you will. I'm sure you know someone who's experienced that. May your troubles be minor, blessings more, and happiness come through your door. God bless. We'll see you next time.